Okay, it's 4:30. I'll call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, Tla-o-qui-aht. Notice to attendees that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. Notice to virtual attendees to sign up for public comment and question period using the Q&A function in Zoom. To register, participants are required to enter their full name, residential address, and the agenda item they wish to speak on. Moving on, through unanimous consent, there are no objections. I'll move that pursuant to section 11(1) of District of Tofino Meeting Procedure Bylaw number 1229/2016, the temporary facility provided for the public to watch and hear the October 8th, 2024 regular council meeting is to be held in a multi-purpose room at the Tofino Community Hall located at 351 Arnett Road in Tofino, BC, and that the meeting is to be held electronically via Zoom and live broadcasted via the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. Seeing no objection, the motion is carried. Also, through unanimous consent, I'll move that the October 8th, 2024 regular council agenda be adopted. Seeing no objections, that is council. Motion is carried. Consent agenda, item 4. Through unanimous consent, if there are no objections, I'll move that items 4.1 to 4.5 of the consent agenda on the regular council meeting held October 8th, 2024 be approved and received. Seeing no objection, that motion is carried. Mayor's report. Don't we have public comment before the mayor's report usually? Am I off?
We,
Sorry.
we had it backwards, and so we have since fixed it.
No kidding.
Yes.
There you go.
So you are correct.
There you go. I thought I had a reprieve for a moment, but I don't. Okay. Mayor's report. Actually, if anybody's listening on out there in Zoom land, we have an important announcement on the Fire Hall open house, which is actually happening today. In a half hour, starts at 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock. And if anyone is interested in joining the Tofino Volunteer Fire Department, or if your children would like to tour the fire hall, please join the fire department open house today for information tours and hot dogs. And it is at the George Hubert Memorial Fire Hall, 2nd and Campbell Street, Tofino, BC, today 5 to 7. And get fire hall tours, fire truck tours, hot dogs, hot chocolate, recruitment information. So if everybody's ready to go, they can leave here and go there. That is that. Mayor's reports. Report on UBCM. It was fantastic to go to Vancouver with the staff, Tatiana and fellow councillors, to learn, lobby, and advocate for our town or for our region. We got to meet ministers and minister staff, and I just want to say it was one that stuck out for me, two that stuck out for me. One is Minister of Housing, Ravi Kalam, who has taken a personal interest in Tofino and who supports communities like ours throughout the province. And without BC Housing, without BC Builds, without Minister of Housing providing the funds and services to help essential service housing, to keep our hospitals and our schools and all of our community amenities open that not only serve us but serve our region, it would be a very difficult spot that we are in. So I do want to say thank you to Minister Ravi Kalam for supporting communities like ours. I also enjoyed meeting Minister Kang, Minister of Municipal Affairs, who was delighted to know has a personal connection to Tofino, and again has gone over and above to help municipalities like ours across the province. Hopefully, we'll see lots of forward motion come out of those meetings, and it was great to hang out with my excellent council, minus Councillor McMaster. We missed you. I
was thinking about
thinking about it. To not only just to have a great time meeting other elected officials who are also putting their hearts and their time and their efforts into their own communities, but just to be around a great group of people who do love their community and put so much effort and time into it. So that was wonderful, and it was great to meet with ministries shoulder to shoulder with TFN, Chief Elmer Frank, Saya Matho, Lands Resources Management, and their Jim Chisholm, their manager. And that was a great privilege to go together to the province with one voice to advocate for our community's infrastructure needs and housing needs. That's all for me. Public comment on agenda items. Chat.
Thank you, Mayor Law. I will now make an open call for comments to both members of the public present in the gallery and those participating online. For those in the gallery who wish to speak, please raise your hand. If there is anyone attending online via Zoom that would like to make a comment, you can do so now using the Q&A function. Before making a comment, you will need to state your name, your address, and the agenda item you are speaking to. I will now do a calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times. There are no comments at this time, Mayor.
Super. Then I believe we're moving on to correspondence. We have item 9.1, M. Fraser regarding green burials. Council.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Law, through the chair. This has come up a while ago, and I'm looking at Mr. Rogers around the green burials, and we had conversation, and it was a couple of years ago now, because I had an inquiry around that, and I'm just wondering if staff can maybe comment. I know that we had a long conversation about the procedures and stuff, but it is something that I think is going to come up more and more often, and I'm wondering if staff would have the opportunity to speak to the potential and maybe what the hurdles and or opportunities are.
Thanks, Councilor Sarah, and through the chair. Staff haven't spent a lot of time I've tried our conversations and I've done a little bit of background reading on it, so we haven't gone into the details of it. I think it's something that would warrant a look by staff. I think it may be interesting to understand how our ground, like literally the ground, is different than other parts of the province where this happens. I think I understand where the writer's coming from in terms of trying to reduce the amount of chemicals that go into to the water table and into the soil. I also recognize affordability as well as being an issue. So if council is interested, I would think that staff would be happy to look into this further.
Would a motion be required for that, or is I'll make a motion that if staff could take the opportunity to look into the potential procedures for green burials in Tofino.
Second.
Councilor Sloman, second. Any further comments from council? No comments at all?
I just had one.
Yeah.
I just thought I thought this was like a good idea to be in line with some of our strategic goals, because it is reducing the amount of chemicals put into our environment.
Yeah. All right, no further comments? Last chance. All in favor? Seeing none, opposed, motion carried. Thank you. We also have 9.2, Q&amp letter of support requests regarding green and inclusive community building application. Just perhaps a question for, I do have a draft motion in support of this, but a question for clarity from staff. We do not have an application for this one.
Thank you, Mayor Law. I don't believe that we do. No.
No, I think maybe our home might do that, or there's somebody.
Yeah. Unfortunately, April or Ms. Corona not here tonight, so I can't confirm with that division, but we could do, if council is interested in doing a letter of support, it could be contingent on whether we do have our own application in.
I think that's generally the general rule, is if we're competing, then we don't offer letter of support, right? I do have a letter of support, a draft motion. If council is interested in entertaining the draft motion, contingent on the district not having a competing application. Is that okay?
Yes.
Do you want me to include that in the?
Yes.
That was it. Just. Okay, then I'll move from the chair that staff be authorized to draft a letter of support to be signed by the mayor regarding the Tla-o-qui-aht Green and Inclusive Community Building application, contingent on the District of Tofino not having a competing application. Seconded by Councillor Steer. Any further comments? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, motion carried. Okay, moving on, we have 10.1, we have Emergency Operations Center and Equipment Storage, and we have a report from Community Services.
And again, I'll say I'm not Director of Community Services, I'm the Director of Construction Public Works, but I am filling in for Ms. Vermont today, who's away unexpectedly. Today, this presentation is about moving our Emergency Operations Center permanently to a location next to our wastewater treatment plant. So as we've renovated the municipal hall, there was a cupboard there that we stored most of our PVC. So now it will be a washroom. It's going to be, I think. After we've had to find a place to relocate this equipment. This equipment includes all the things that we need to set up the EOC within about an hour's notice, including computers and other documents. Also, that room was primarily where we acclimated. We were there through COVID. It's already where we run the municipality from in the event of emergency. With NAP demobilizing from the wastewater treatment plant, there's a number of opportunities for us to purchase ATCO or Britco type trailers. There was one that we thought might be suitable for a new EOC building, and so this is what this presentation is about. Basically, why is this a good idea? We'll have an area that's set up permanently, so our remote opening storage will have tables and equipment set up all the time. We'll be able to use the space, which is quite large, for EOC training. There's a couple of extra rooms in there. One will be for the stuff that we don't need out all the time, and the other room potentially be for meeting room during an activation. And again, access to other district resources. We have our public works and utilities team out there, so sometimes a good connection there for emergencies. And it's also located away from the public, which is also an important aspect of the operations center. To the building, I think we're all familiar with what a modular building looks like. This area here would be the meeting room. I believe this is the area that would be primarily for storage, and this would potentially be a meeting room. There are no washrooms, I don't believe, in this building. No, that's correct. But we have access to the wastewater treatment plant, which has brand new washrooms in the event that we so the project budget is $50,000. We've got a great deal from NAP for $25,000. When we take on these modular buildings, we have to go through a building permit process, including securing them to something heavy so that they don't move around as much in an earthquake. We have to usually construct stairs that meet the code, as well as making sure that it's set up for IT. So with all of those and the 5% contingency cost for this complete project, complete cost of this project comes in at $50,000. I don't leave a recommendation there. I won't read it. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
Excellent, thank you. Questions from council? Questions, any questions? Comments from council? Councilor Steer.
No comment, but if there was no other, I'll just read the motion.
Sure. Go ahead.
That staff be authorized to move forward with the purchase and installation of a modular building for the purpose of Tofino's Emergency Operations Center and equipment storage in the amount of $50,000 to be funded by the General Surplus Reserve Fund.
Seconded by Councillor Thomas. Any further comments? All in favor? None opposed, motion carried.
And that the 2024-2028 financial plan be amended to include a transfer from the General Surplus Reserve Fund in the amount of $50,000 and a capital expenditure of the same value for the Tofino Modular Emergency Operations Center project.
Seconded by Councillor Thomas. Any further comments from council? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, motion carried. Excellent. We have asset management program updates. Crava? Let's try and go.
Hello, Mayor and Council, on behalf of the Director of Infrastructure and Public Works, staff are pleased to present the brief program. So this is I'm sure everyone's seen it before, but this is the AMBC framework. The outer ring on this circle represents asset management practices and what we're trying to achieve. None of what we want to do on the outside of the circle is going to be possible though without the inner core components, which are finances, information, assets, and of course people. The asset management program as a whole aims to bridge the link between these two circles to support staff with skills and training so that we fulfill our strategic goals. The program progress where we started. Program staffing commenced in January 2023. Staff were focused in the assess stage of the previous framework, mainly finding what assets we had, what information we needed to collect on those assets. At the time, we had an asset register, or as we call it, the inventory. Data in the register was limited to tangible capital assets, which was based around financial reporting purposes. We identified that there was a substantial information gap. The major concerns were the lack of information surrounding assets that predated 1990 in service dates, historical costs, and so on. And then 2017, Urban Systems developed the Asset Management Investment Plan. This used that pre-existing data to develop contributions into our capital infrastructure and levies. Geographic information systems, or which much shorter just called GIS. The existing GIS that we had was out of date, primarily in the infrastructure capacity, because we didn't have a formal process to make sure that things were updated. It was also renderings from 2007 CAD drawings, which are a schematic-based drawing. It doesn't actually represent where assets physically are, it just shows kind of how the system works. The existing software at the time also provided no way of linking the information for assets that were around town with the asset register, which is critically important so the two kind of make sense so that you don't have one thing saying another. Where are we today? So I filled the coordinating position in this past May. And the technician role was reposted and filled in June of 2024. After a year of assessing data and implementing software, staff are currently now in the planning process of the framework for various different service classes for the district. The asset register, staff created a secondary register basically, which we call the AM register. The rationale for creating this was that it allows us to componentize assets that we already have in our register without affecting the financial reporting. So we can break down these large lump assets that were on the books into the individual components. This is really important because our tangible capital assets that we had in there, the estimated service lives are based on our policy. And we can have an asset as a whole that's expected to last a certain amount of time, but the individual components within that asset are going to come up for renewal much sooner. Our current software can now also be used to quantify, track, condition and risk for both registers. So we'll have one central software that has all of that information, so we can build that stuff into the financials and everything. Probably the most important for myself, at least, was in creating the secondary inventory, is that we can calculate and automatically update over time the replacement cost based on the component level. So we can start to develop that cost into our shorter term budgets. For GIS, we have mapped the majority, if not all of our critical assets to within 60 centimeter location accuracy. So we have a Trimble connection that maps where valves are and hydrants and to that kind of accuracy setting. One thing that's really great about that, as you can imagine, is that in the middle of winter, if we have a snowstorm and a water main break, we can actually go with crews now and figure out where a valve is located, even if it's 2 feet underground, or under snow, sorry. Staff also now have the full capabilities to collect and update the data live, so that the GIS mapping is current, not a month old or 2 years old. It's live every day whenever there's a major stuff. One little thing about this that we realized is during the Arnett Road storm infrastructure upgrade, we actually ran into a section of water main that staff had believed was AC material. And the contractor at the time, which was working on storm drainage, actually physically located and updated that it was PVC material, which extends the service life, the expected service life of that water main substantially. Rather than being an in-service date of the early 1960s, we now know that it would have been installed in either the late 80s or the early 90s. So there's a huge gain there for replacement. Line of sight. So this figure from AMBC might seem a little convoluted or busy, but the summary is really simple. It's a guide to ensure that the strategic vision meets all the way down to the operations and maintenance requirements at a component level. An example of this would be just reviewing, just an example, the development strategy, or sorry, council's strategic strategy of developing strategies to provide sustainable funding for the Tofino Housing Corporation. Using line of sight, we would look at what service this provides, which is pretty obvious. But we would also start to look at, do we have the associated assets required to support that service? And then what are the additional operations and maintenance requirements related to the components that fund that major service? A recent example related to headwaters specifically is, we now have a number of new streetlights that were installed. And at the end of that development project, those streetlights will become district assets. And we will have to increase our operational budgets for BC hydro rates, right? So AIM strategy. So our strategy goals, the reality is that asset management practices are always going to be a balance between community values, what we want, and then the willingness to pay. The overall strategy aims to support informed decision making at both the staff and council levels to ensure sustainable service delivery. Ways that we're going to get there. Staff are currently developing trend data derived from financial planning records to assess the true cost of service delivery. The trend for each service, in a sense, defines the current life cycle costs that are directly related to our informal agreed upon levels of service for that service. The steps to achieve this, staff are also creating a service hierarchy So we have a number of different services that the district provides, and we need to collectively rank those services to allocate funding. So we'll be using historical funding allocation and also industry standards for criticality and risk for those services. And the really important thing in the strategy is to have a consistent matrix for risk for all the different services that are provided, so we're comparing the same thing. Lastly, creating AM plans at a service level. This is gonna streamline a credible approach to achieving our long-term financial plan developments. The example is we're creating plans based on transportation as a whole, so not just roads. We're gonna incorporate the cost of line painting and streetlights and sidewalks, inspections, all of these things, so that we can have a clear understanding of what that service provides and costs. So this is a chart that just represents our staff's current understanding of where we feel we are for AM readiness. It kind of indicates the areas that we want to focus on. Gradually over time, through tools and training, we're hoping to see this inner form turn into more of a circular shape. This chart will also be presented at future program progress updates, so we can start to track and see how that is developing. Lastly, this is the asset management roadmap. So what we want to achieve over the next 4 years. I'm not going to go over each individual line items, just a couple of highlights for it. We'll shortly be presenting the asset management plan for vehicles and fleet, or as we call it, fleet. This plan is based on a 20-year horizon. Next year, we'll be delivering an AM policy update, a transportation plan, AM plan, a water infrastructure AM plan. In 2026, we will deliver a sanitary sewer AM plan, a natural asset register, a TCA policy update. And in 2027, we will deliver a second AM policy update. It's really important to keep that policy update because it indicates the values that we're talking about and that we're responsible for. We'll be doing a fleet AM plan update, a storm drainage asset management plan, a buildings and structures plan, parks and trails, and hopefully using all of those AM plans, we should have enough support to present a credible long-term financial plan. That wraps up the update. You guys any questions?
Excellent. That was great. Thank you. Questions from council? Just here.
Yeah, thank you. And through the chair, thank you for the presentation and the update. I saw in the last slide there under deliverables of the 2026 timeframe, the natural asset register. And I'm wondering if the framework that you presented is I know it's a little more complex in terms of it's not in our usual wheelhouse. I'm wondering, is this framework that you've outlined, is that what would be used in essence to create that register and then give us a long-term look at those natural assets before us?
Thank you for the question through the chair. CSA just released an actual template for how natural assets will be registered. So now that was kind of one of the missing links with natural assets is everything that we go framework wise for a regular engineered asset, as we call them, have these certain parameters that we know, useful lives and service dates, historical costs. These things can't be quantified for natural assets. So we're going to look at obviously what this natural asset replaces in terms of what the cost of an engineered infrastructure would be. And then we need to develop some, once industry is caught up, we're going to use that data to develop what are the operational costs that are associated with that natural asset. How are we protecting it? What is the longevity of it? How do we, so there's definitely a lot to build on it. We did some initial consultation with some companies specifically for natural assets last year. And a lot of the questions that we had on like just parameters of how do we quantify it? Are we counting it at the tree level or the ecosystem level, or how is it going to be quantified? And a lot of those questions came back from the consultant who was the leader expert. there was a lot of unknowns even then, which was last year, so. I think there's definitely internally, like staff are finding a lot of areas that we can quantify as natural assets currently. And the matter is just to figure out what the operational costs and budget allocations are gonna be to those, because we can, historically, we can look at the fact that we have these natural assets, they've always been there. We have not been allocating funds towards them. They have been operating at a certain level. We need to identify that level and then figure out what funding we will have available to keep that going.
And through the chair, just as a follow, and I'm curious, just from a technical standpoint, when I think of stormwater drainage as an example where we have, the ability right there that's doing a lot of that work for us. And I'm wondering if that's going to be able to, how one quantifies that in terms of a tool to be able to look at the engineered asset and as opposed to the one that is a little harder to quantify, and then put those two together to give us a more accurate understanding of what that service but is being done for free in essence, how we put that into that, as an example, stormwater management.
Yeah, thank you for the question through the chair. I would just reiterate that the industry is changing the way that we look at natural assets. In 2017, the AMF, or Asset Management Investment Plan, indicated that all of our storm ditches were quantified as natural assets and therefore not included in the plan. But they're not natural assets. Those are an engineered asset. That is a shore bank, that is filled, it's road material that has been set for a certain grade that may change over time to mitigate climate change and things, and requires some ditching and to every, say decade to make sure that inverts are correct so that water is draining properly, not flooding roads. That's different from a stream that's going to run through someone's natural property that may require a statutory right of way to protect it within their so that it's indicated, yeah, this is infrastructure. We didn't put it there, but it is provided us service.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick, another question. This is really fascinating, but for the natural asset lens, is it purely infrastructure?
No, sorry, thank you for the question through the chair. It's the service. What service does it provide? There's going to be a variety of natural assets that we're going to quantify. But it's always based on the service that it provides.
The service that it provides, so it's not going to necessarily go into the cultural or social aspect of it.
I'm very happy to explore that.
Yeah. Okay, it'd be interesting to see how that culturally can expand. With First Nations involvement, just for one, maybe some natural asset value that is yet to be discovered for this room. Anyway. Fascinating. Oh, council, any more questions, comments? Mr.
Through the chair, it just led to another question there. It's something like climate change and the ability for, as a carbon sink, if that is something that he's nodding his head. So I think that answers something that would be looked at. So yeah.
Lots to explore. Great. Well, look forward to seeing that come to fruition. It's going to be an interesting journey. Excellent. We do have a recommendation. I'll move that the asset management program update be received for information. Second by Councillor Thomas. Any further comments? All in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. Mr. Grove, 10.3.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This is going to be a bit of a self and so we're here today to introduce the Mr. Growth policy for discussion. Right. So bit of a background on the timeline to recap how we got to this point. So back on May 23rd of this year, staff received council direction to move forward with the Mr. Growth policy that consider various options to residential growth. in response to findings of the water master plan, which confirmed the district's water supply is oversubscribed. In July, on July 23rd, staff prepared a rough outline of the types of development that should be prioritized by the policy, drawing from direction contained in the OCP and supporting documents like the housing needs report. And staff also provided preliminary calculations on average water consumption rates based on housing typology. On August 26th, at the Committee of the Whole, Council reviewed several risk scenarios associated with permitting different levels of growth and provided direction to staff to consider an upper limit of, or a range between 100 and 120 cubic meters per day of average of additional water supply to be considered in the policy. October 8th, that's today, where we are introducing the policy for discussion. So this slide really highlights some of the key drivers and considerations that inform the policy, some of which will be a bit of a recap. To preserve land uses, one of the primary objectives of the policy is to define the priority or preferred uses that ought to be allocated a portion of the water supply. Generally speaking, the policy prioritizes uses in forms of greatest need based on the OCP and other guiding documents like the housing needs report. So these uses include residential housing, particularly non-market housing and multifamily, and low intensity non-residential uses like commercial retail. Risk and remaining capacity. So again, based on council direction from the August 26th Committee of the Whole meeting, policy allows an additional 120 cubic meters per day of water supply to be allocated, which is a reflection of the community's general risk tolerance as discussed at that Committee of the Whole meeting and measured by days of highway. Latent growth. So it's important to note that the policy as designed right now will allow for the continued build out of existing residential development permissions, up to 2 dwelling units like sanctuary suites or caretaker cottages, though such development will still be tracked and subtracted against the remaining water capacity. The other key consideration informing policy design is the allocation of 50% of the remaining water capacity towards development led by the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. And this really reflects one of the OCP's foundational principles of reconciliation. On to you.
In terms of financial impacts, this is largely unchanged from the previous presentation. There's no direct impact from adopting this policy, but likely if we adopt it, there'll be some considerations for the reduction of certain development related fees and charges such as development cost charges, resource development and taxation. Estimated demand. So this slide basically outlines what we think we know about existing demands and nothing past the state. So if anybody else came into the planning office tomorrow, this doesn't account for it. But if we consider that we're going to allocate 60 meters of the water to Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, depending on how you calculate it, that might be as much as 230 units. We have an existing cube that has about another 62 meters cubed of water, and again, about 235 units. We have a latent residential demand, which following last meeting, we did a GIS analysis of our properties in Tofino and business licenses, followed up by an audit by vehicle to confirm what we think we know, to get an estimated 112 meters cubed. So that would be, to Mr. Ladder's previous comment, if we have a house that doesn't have a suite yet and it has a suite, that would be part of that latent demand. The intent of the policy is to provide an exemption to the Schedule A requirements, but again, we'll still be tracking it. So if you add it all up, we're well over 120 cubic meters. But we also have to understand that that number of units based on our historic growth would be 27 years of build out. And so what we end up with, if we're looking at our 120 meters cubed today, is about 14 years of build out at 25 units a year. And again, that comes with fits and starts. We didn't have a lot up into headwaters, and then we've got a lot of units because of headwaters. It may be another 5 years or 10 years before we get something outside. Development can speed up, it can slow down depending on the economy. So these are all just at this point, our best guesses with the information that we have to hand. I think you're the next slide, sure.
So this is really a snapshot of the table of contents and the structure of the policy. There's 13 sections, there's a lot there. I'm not gonna go into detail of each section, but I'm gonna provide some highlights from some of the more salient sections. So remaining water supply, as touched on in previous slides and alluded to by Mr. Rogers. Based on council direction, the remaining water supply in the policy right now is set at 120 cubic meters per day, with 50% or 60 cubic meters being allocated towards Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation led development. The remaining 60 cubic meters per day for district development is further divided into 50 cubic meters per day for residential development and 10 cubic meters per day for non-residential. The idea here is to prioritize needed residential while also enabling support of low intensity non-residential uses like commercial. Application of the policy and water allocation certificate, or what we've come to call a WAC for simplicity. The way that I view this policy is that it's a guide for making decisions on development, but it's also a framework for tracking and measuring allocated water. The mechanism that we've landed on for allocating and tracking remaining supply is through a water allocation certificate, or a WAC. The bottom line behind the policy design is that a building permit will not be issued unless the applicant has a valid WAC. The way that an applicant gets a WAC is by applying for one at the applicant's earliest entry point into the development process. So for example, if you're applying for a zoning amendment, you would apply for the WAC at the same time. And if water supply is available and allocation is granted at the time of zoning amendment approval, then the WAC would be issued for at least at this point 2 years. To give enough time for the applicant to get their building permit. The duration of the WAC would also change depending on the entry point into the development approvals process. And to make sure that the water application is not granted without performance, WACs will have a finite duration. So once they expire, if a developer does not move forward and complete the development that they've been approved for, the allocated capacity that was held under the WAC will be returned back to the remaining water supply. Ineligible uses. So again, the point of the policy is to facilitate the development of priority residential uses along with a smaller amount of non-residential low intensity uses to maximize remaining supply and meet community needs. Water intensive uses, which are defined as uses exceeding a specific ADU, which is still to be confirmed. And non-priority uses like choice accommodation will not be allowed. The policy builds in the opportunity for ineligible uses to be considered if alternative water supply solutions can be provided. Criteria and scoring. So unless exempt, which I'll discuss next, residential proposals will be evaluated and scored against criteria in Schedule A of the policy, which is the evaluation matrix, to determine how closely the proposal is to the district's development needs. So in general, the criteria included in the matrix includes things like density, tenure, affordability, and location within the village containment area. And the criteria tend to favor compact multifamily rentals. And again, these criteria are derived from the OCP priorities and supporting policy documents like the Housing Report. When reviewing applications against the criteria, the threshold that we have right now is applications that receive a score of 50% or more may be granted a WAC. Exemptions. So this is an important piece. The policy identifies proposals which may be quote unquote exempt, but I want to be clear that when we say exempt, it doesn't mean exempt from the policy as a whole. It means it's exempt from needing, or sorry, it's exempt from the policy as a whole or from needing WAC. Is every development needs a WAC, It means that you're exempt from an evaluation matrix or criteria and scheduling. That's all that. So anticipated water demand would still be tracked, allocated, and subtracted from the remaining water supply for exempt proposals. Exempt development includes latent residential permissions for existing residentially zoned properties up to Q dwellings, Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation led development, non-residential development that's not considered a water intensive use, and things like minor repairs, renovations, and changes of use that do not increase demand. Of note, the policy builds in a sort of notwithstanding clause that enables council the discretion to grant an exemption for any proposal, provided there is remaining water supply. Monitoring, reporting, and implementation. So finally, the policy builds in some requirements for periodic monitoring and reporting to ensure that the policy is achieving the objectives that we intended it to do. Starting with a 6-month review and check-in, followed by another one after that.
So the last 2 slides will be sort of key takeaways for us and our potential next steps. We just want to, reiterate that we're focusing on residential housing, but it does provide some opportunities for other types of uses depending on how much water they're using, as well as leaving the door for developments that come to the table with some sort of alternative way to provide water demand or provide their own water and reduce their demand. We think this provides fairly transparent degree of certainty for the development community and for the community and for council and for ourselves to deal with the water issue that we're talking about. It gives us time to start planning for this source water, an additional source water project, which is underway, and maybe council expects to see that later this fall, beginning with that. It does focus the development market on residential housing, even though the OCP is very clear about this, and even though over the last 5 years we've seen a shift to more residential and less of other types of developments. This really puts a point to that. It allows for innovation, and someone can come to us with proposals that does not need to use much Tofino water, and they found a way to provide their own water. It allows that. In the end, makes this process somewhat competitive, knowing that we've got fair amount of demand, more than the water we have to supply that. So next steps, so today we're looking for council's considerations, feedback, comments, questions of clarity. Following today, we will be meeting with Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, Chamber of Commerce, Church of Tofino. It's currently out for legal review, the draft policy, and then it's likely a public one that which would like to move around the Talk Tofino page to get the community's feedback. All that will come back to council either with an updated policy as well as an administrative process, how exactly we're going to do this, who's responsible for what the documents look like, how does one get through the process. And then hopefully, it doesn't always happen, but maybe we get it all right and it comes back to council in about a month and we can adopt the policy at that point, or go back to the drawing board and make amendments, along with me to get it right.
Super. All right. I'm going to start out by saying, I like a lot of this, and there's some things that I do not like. And so I have a lot to say. It's going to take some time. So I am going to open this up to council first, just giving you the heads up.
Yeah, I'm just going to sit and take notes. So.
There you go. So I'm going to open up for council. You want to do questions and comments? I think at the same time is probably okay. Just keep it going. Councillor Master, Councillor Coleman. Nice.
I have a question on your evaluation matrix. Or do you want to put that up on?
Yeah, policy up, schedule.
In the Schedule A or whatever it is.
The policy or the presentation?
Policy.
Okay. Yeah, one moment, we'll grab the policy.
Appendix 1.
The chair, maybe I can ask if you look for this document, is that
RTC.
of all the things that we did, that schedule is probably the toughest. Determine how to do that, this is probably our 8th version of it, we basically, every version we did, we ran through to see how it would line up. In the end, this is what we came to. I don't know if Alex, Mr. Ladder and I were comfortable in the end, but we thought it was at a level that at least we could get some feedback on. But it's funny that it does come down at the end to scoring of what that means.
Do you want to, while you look up that, get that up? You want
Actually, it's in there, it should be in the,
take another, do you want to take another question and let them get it up online?
sure.
Okay, let's go to Councillor Sloman, and then if you can, somebody can find that and we can put that matrix up there. We can talk about it.
Yeah, my question was a question for clarity. So I read that to receive a WAC, staff would do the evaluations for business licenses, which would then affect short-term rentals. And I'm just wondering how that would affect like current builds that have a building permit that are maybe building to have a short-term rental or a bed and breakfast. So that would fall into the receiving a WAC or not receiving a WAC.
To the chair, to Councillor Sloman, thanks for the question. Short-term rentals, I think there's 2 questions there. So the first one is about the business licensing process. The only reason we would ask for a WAC, maybe a trigger business license, if it does include the bill, so that would, or if a business license needed to do something. So it's just another entry point. This policy will not deal with short-term rentals in that, other than it won't permit commercial accommodation. But short-term rentals will need to be addressed through zoning, not this policy. And so this policy doesn't account for late development. So say something is zoned R1 and it doesn't have a suite, they put a suite in, they still have the same rental permissions that they have. So it's not going to do that. It's going to deal with water. It's going to leave things like land use short-term rentals to where it does belong, which is in zoning, potentially business license things. Generally, we're going to be looking more at like the large commercial accommodation ones is primary where this is focused, but we're trying to keep the two processes separate. I don't know anything to add.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Master.
Yeah, first point on your evaluation matrix, the total score is out of 100, but the maximum score, as you've got it there, is 95. So you've missed 5 points somewhere. And then I have a question. Is this graded? For instance, if we look at affordability, if say we're looking at a 100-unit development, if someone does 51 units, they get 20 points, and someone does 100 units, they get 20 points. Is that correct? Or are you going to scale it in between 51 and 100?
Yeah, thank you for the question. That's actually something we wrestled with in previous iterations of this criteria and weighting. You're correct. Right now, the way that it's designed, there's no differentiation between
Yes. So
100 versus 51. So yeah, perhaps we need to reevaluate and think whether maybe there's an additional category there that
I think you should mathematically. I think you should apply an exponential to it, and I think you would get a lot fairer bias because you're trying to reward the people that build more affordable units.
Yeah.
So
this iteration did have a higher scoring for 99% to 100 or 99 above it. Yeah, very fair point.
yeah, so I think I'd look at an exponential rather than a step approach. That's all I have. No.
Councillor Sawyer.
I just have a question for clarity through the chair on water conservation. I'm just curious as to if something is not reliant on water supply, what, therefore not taking any water out of the raw supply, why is it only receiving 10 points if that is not something that would like hugely solve the whole reason it would be getting a water allocation certificate.
Thank you for the question through the chair. Yeah, I think reliance on the water system is absolutely critical, but it's definitely not it's only one part of the puzzle. And I think what we want to be really careful about is, just for example, if there's a use type that is, for example, tourist accommodation, it still doesn't align with the future development goals and priorities of the CP. So I think generally speaking, we want to sort of ensure that we're capturing the priorities, objectives of the CP.
That's a good chair, I can address Councilor Sawyer's question just as an example. So let's say, for example, a developer comes in and they want to develop 8 half-acre lots that will allow 2 units per lot, and they're intended to be executive level houses or whatever. But because they have those big lots, they have that opportunity to be able, and maybe aware of these really large storage things, and then not reliant on District of Tofino water. Is that the type of development that we want to say, sure, you can have it because you take care of your own water? And so these are the kind of questions like that would come to us. So we'd be looking for a development that does not do that. Not necessarily, it's a good council for this.
If I may follow up, I'm thinking for the, what comes to mind is the business class developments that, just for example, say if it's a wetsuit surfboard rental development outside the village containment area, and they'd be 100% reliant on rainwater or catchment systems, anything like that. I personally would feel that could get a greater number of points, just because it's not we still do want to support the business class in Tofino. And it's great to build housing, but people will, want to have jobs, especially if they're going to be affording rent on their own place.
Thank you for the question. We'll look back at that. This is one of the categories we weren't sure whether to include or not. We wanted to encourage water conservation in residential housing. It's likely, I haven't seen business yet, that supply 100% of their own water, but it's not to say it's not out there. But whether this ends up, this one stays, and maybe Alex and I, so I don't know, take that back and think.
Yeah, through the chair, we'll just comment. These are great questions because it forces us to reevaluate this grant version. But I think the way that I think about looking at this valuation matrix, and maybe the previous example that provided that first combination wasn't the best one to use, but the evaluation matrix really only applies to residential proposals. And so the way that the policy is designed is that non-residential applications would be considered if there are 2 checks. First is there enough remaining water supply? So for non-residential uses, we're currently allocating 10 cubic meters. So that's the first check. If there's enough, great. The second check is the non-residential use a quote unquote water intensive use? And that's just a flat threshold. So if the non-residential use, we still need to bat around current numbers, but
point, we think it's probably down.
Yeah, so we're thinking right now, maybe something above 0.6 cubic meters is a like water intensive use. So if you're a non-residential use, and there's remaining capacity and you're below 0.6 cubic meters, then you're fine. But if you're a use that you could conceive that is using greater than 0.6 cubic meters per day, then perhaps you could do some alternative measures to sort of get your anticipated consumption to below that 2.6 threshold.
Okay, cool, thank you, that clears some things up.
Councillor Steer.
Yes, thank you, and through the chair, thank you for the presentation. Just maybe a quick comment and then a very specific type question. Very supportive of the direction in terms of the purpose of the working, which is that the remaining water supply is allocated in a transparent manner in line with our OCP and our housing and reconciliation. So from that lens, I think this is a great starting point, and we'll get there. So thank you for that, and I think it's hitting those in general. The questions around the matrix, I think there's obviously, I think you guys are taking the feedback, so I'm not going to. I think you guys. Councillor McMaster certainly has a few different areas there, and so I won't go into detail, but there was a few issues around that matrix, and I think you guys have probably identified it's an area that needs a little work on. I did have an oddly enough, a specific question, maybe just for clarity in terms of the WAC, the Water Allocation Certificate, and I'm going to use kind of a specific example of a subdivision, for example, for a single family lot. They will need to apply, of course, for a WAC. And you talked about entry points into that process. And so if they are, they don't need a zoning amendment or anything, it's a straight subdivision. And through they'll go through that evaluation matrix and whenever that gets solidified, at what percentage, in essence, do they pass or fail in terms of how we grade it and whether it's a check mark? I will have a follow-up as well, but that was the first one. I was just curious as to where we lie in that. Using this specific example, as a subdivision for a single family lot, if that helps. If not, don't.
Sorry. Thanks for the question to the chair. The pass fail threshold right now, I mean, I guess you pointed out the math is in. So we sort of identified 50% kind of works out. So
50% plus one.
The way that we designed the criteria is we try to imagine what the perfect development is. So each criteria is a component of in our view through the lens of OCP, a development that is meeting the needs of the community. So in sort of running through some existing developments, some of which are in the queue right now, as mock or as examples to see how they score. I think we land on 50% as the threshold that proposals would need to meet for us to consider issuing the WAC. For a specific example of a single lot subdivision, I think just looking at the criteria, there's, well, I guess. So I need to think about that particular example, but the threshold is 50%.
Thank you. And I have a follow-up in terms of once again, related to, and I know the matrix is going to be worked on. So, but if there is let's say a fail, is there a process for the applicant to come back to council to say, we would like a reevaluation, because you guys are, through the lens of the OCP and there are exceptions, as we know, that potentially you guys have to do through, your planning process, but there may be an exception that council can say, hey, this makes sense. We know it's outside of this. And so I didn't read it in there, but I assume there would be.
Great question. Through the chair, here, we've built that in that and everything can go to council. So any of our decisions that we're making based on policy documents can go to council. Generally, that means that you're going to get everything, but it is in there because in the end, this is council's policy. These are council decisions. Where the policy helps us make things a little bit clearer for the development community and then outlines it. And so if someone is denied a WAC, they don't meet that criteria, they have an option to come to council. That process will form part of that next report, the administration section. So I've already worked on what that might look like. Is it a delegation to council? I don't want to make it too onerous for people or onerous for council. Is it a letter to council requesting review? I'm not sure exactly what it is, but we have a couple different ideas that we'll bring forward at next meeting. But yeah, the intent is, to your point earlier, so there's a notwithstanding clause, which is that council again has is the ultimate decision maker here. And so if something is not meeting standards we decide on, somebody can come and talk to council.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
My comment in, maybe question in there, is around the, review process. That staff will review when it's policy 6 months from the date, and then every 24 months after that date. So I'm thinking 6 months and then every 2 years. And I'm wondering if maybe it might need a more graduated, like a 6 months, but another 6 months, then a year, then 2 years or something. Just, I see that it's pretty hard to imagine every scenario of how this is going to be, how it's going to play out after it's implemented. And at some point, we also arrive at a final answer. We don't want a policy that's shifting every 6 months. So I'm just wondering if maybe 2 years after that 6 months is too long of a period to evaluate and review the policy. I don't know, you might not have an answer now, but it seems if we want the policy to really work, it might require some more tweaking at the front end. I'll just leave that.
Okay, my turn. Yeah, go ahead.
Everybody covered most of them already. My question is, if we're giving out wax during the rezoning, but then they actually want to build something different than what there was rezoned with. So let's say affordability, we look at things that are getting rezoned and they're saying, hey, 4 units are going to be affordable, or cash in lieu. Is cash in lieu going to count towards an affordability matrix in some way for the water allocation? Something to think about.
Yeah, through the
Yeah.
chair, great question. This is a little bit of devil's in details, but where I'm comforted is that during the rezoning process, that's going to sit in front of council, and so what staff may do in the end is provide like an outline of how these are eligibility criteria, and then it's probably going to have another whole section. Here's going to be different applicants do zoning not and allow council to make that decision at the same time, because again, zoning council makes the decision on the WAC, not staff. And so there'd be an opportunity for those larger, more complicated ones to have a little bit more, they'll have more eyes on them, they'll have council's eyes on it. And so I think we should be able to deal with that through the zoning process. But maybe let's check it with each other. I wonder, Councilor Anderson, 6 month check-ins to see, make sure that is indeed happening.
I'm sure we'll discover all sorts of nitty gritty stuff as we delve into it. Yeah.
Okay, is it my turn?
Yeah.
All right, I have lots to say, so I'm gonna give you an easy one first. Before I get on to the maybe harder stuff, but in number 10 of this of the report and subline F. 1F, development of lots with existing residential zoning permissions prior to the date of adoption. The adoption of this policy to a maximum of 2 dwelling units. Now, this is just a preamble, but since we're going through rezoning and we're talking about tertiary units, adding the possibility of carriage houses or whatever, this would seem to preclude that. So I wondered about it's my first question about the addition to the maximum of 2 dwelling units. And it seems to me that leaving that off would allow for the addition of tertiary units if that is something that happens in the zoning review.
Thanks for the question, through the chair. It does because that's what the current zoning is. If we get to a point where the District of Tofino is adding tertiary dwellings to whatever zone we decide or wherever we decide to do that, then we can do the policy.
To just amend this one rather than just leave it off.
Exactly. Kind of the question too then would be also like, what does that mean in terms of like latency, right? So if we go through a process of deciding whether to zone for third or fourth dwelling, part of that's gonna be what does that mean in terms of this policy? Do we have to adjust this policy to deal with that or not? But both of them would become to council at the same time for that change. We're just dealing with what we have in front of us today. Because again, you know, the zoning process is underway, that it's a bit of a order for operations, like how long does that take to get done? What is council's ultimate decision for that? I don't know. So we're just dealing with what's in front of us today.
Sure. Okay. All right, now I'll get to, I guess, some of my significant opposition, because I do like a lot of this to say, but I'm going back to the matrix now, and I think it comes down, I was thinking about this as you guys were chatting and people were asking questions, and I think it comes down to the idea or concept of a perfect development that meets the needs of the community. Perfect. What is perfect and why is it perfect? And the problem I have with this matrix is that the density is in units rather than people. And I know I've actually talked to staff about this specifically. Why that is a problem for me is because at some point, preferring high density, smaller units or micro units may seem to fit the bill of using less water because there's less people in them. But those units essentially do not meet the needs of the community. They're very restrictive on who can live there and for how long. And you know, for instance, I mean, we talked about U-Wood developments. It's all 1 or 2 bedroom units. It uses very little water. It's high density. On the surface, it's high density. And superficially, it uses very little water. But what happens to the people who live there who are infants and children and youth or growing families? You know, looking at it from a whole community perspective, a cradle to grave perspective, there is nowhere for those people to go. And so there's a missing middle. They can't simply jump up to, you know, a large house worth $1.6 million or something like that. So to me, for me, the problem with this is that it focuses on those units, but then it doesn't provide an equal opportunity for smaller, resident restricted ownership homes that are actually quite dense for population and can use very little water. And I say this because I live in a property right now, and I know there's, you know, you're using snapshots of types of residences to come up with water use per capita, water use per unit, and who does it serve? And so, yes, we need rentals. Yes, we need 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom. We also need 3 and 4 bedroom, and we need ownership. So just to give you an example where I'm coming from, my house has 2 suites. It's 0.16 of an acre. We have 12 people living there. So there's 2 families, 6 each. That is a density of 75 people per acre, if you were to extrapolate that out, which is essentially the same as Headwaters. In Q2 of this year, for 12 people, that's 6 adults and 6 children, our water use was 0.09 meters cubed per person, which is very low. That's essentially the same as a very high dense micro unit or staffacon. And so, but at the same time, it offers something that none of those other options offer, and that is for couples with dependents, children and youth, teenagers, etc., to grow. It also has far more green space than any of the multi-story family units do. And so I'd actually looked this up and I mapped this out. That is one example of what I'm talking about. So, and I know, so there's my comment. My comment is that, and to fix it, I mean, I'm going to give you what I think would allow this to, if, you know, if you think it's okay or if council agrees, I'm pretty strongly in favor of this, but would be to add language to the density rather than just high density units per acre, but you could do units per acre or residents per acre. which would allow, small family, owned resident, restricted, price restricted, owned properties with houses and suites, etc. That would do it. My point is that it's not just about units, but the people that live there and who can actually live there and for how long. And I do go back down because it does talk about accessibility. Now, assuming we're talking about accessibility, I think it's important to talk about accessibility for all people, all demographics, cradle to grave. That's where I'm going at. Maybe I'll leave it there for a sec before I go on.
To the chair, are you looking for a response, or you said you made a comment a couple times? I'm not sure if you want us to go back and forth or not. I'm happy to do that. I just want to make sure I'm not overstepping my.
No, let's go back and forth. This is open. I think we want discussion with this, right? This is my discussion. I feel pretty passionate about this. That this is what I see as need. And it comes back to go back to rent a little more, it comes back to some of the deficiencies of the housing needs assessment, which really did miss survivorship bias. Why are there so many people between 20 and 30 living here? And why were there so few families? It's because families had to leave. They just were not served properly. Whereas young adults, 20 to 30s were served. There were places for them to live. So that was a bit of a methodology on why I found that the housing needs assessment was deficient. And I could see that as it went forward, it would start to inform decisions, which would again compound that problem that I saw. So there you go. I'm going to throw that out there for feedback, and then I'll carry on.
Thank you for coming, Chair. So I'm not gonna, I guess, go back and forth in an argumentative way, obviously. But I don't. Some of the items that you mentioned are difficult for us as planners to deal with, and so we don't ever zone for people. We zone for units, and we zone based on averages. So for us, census and Tofino will tell you your average 2.4. I know we talked about this, but that's what the average is. There's averages for typologies per person that show on average people living in smaller units use less water on average. That's kind of the level that we're comfortable at as planners. We don't get into the people thing. What we try to do, and thinking about this, what we've tried to do was add a section to the Schedule A criteria that had the more types of units you had, the better score that you would get. And so the intent was that we weren't looking for places. You get better scoring if you had 1 and 2 bedroom places, or 1, 2, and 3 bedroom places, or 3 bedrooms and more. So that was kind of one of the ways we tried to adjust that. There are, again, and what the reason I think this is probably a non-issue for all of us is that we can adjust the scoring, in terms of density, to try to address some of the concerns raised by council, and we can provide a number of different criteria and run through a number of scenarios to sort of show council and community what would be under these different versions. But in the end, what we're talking about is zoning, rezonings, which are always going to end up with council. And so staff are going to say, here's the score that it's got. I think about Woodsmere, for example, 24 small single family lots with 2 suites in those are going to be very dense and would likely, I'd have to do the math, but would likely meet some of these density targets. And if they don't, again, something for Mr. Ladder and I to go back and look at. But there's ways to provide that density in those single families that councils can have the opportunity to make a decision on staff. And so to your point, as development comes forward and it scores well, or it's going to end up with you anyways, or it scores poorly, it's going to end up with you as council anyways. And so I think that decision can be made at your table versus here. I don't think that neither Mr. Louder and I attempted to prefer any type of typology. We just looked at what the OCP says, and what the OCP will also tell you is that we're running out of land, and we'll get more bang for a buck for more people in denser areas. There's only so much land to be available for single family subdivisions and of any size. To that point, the only subdivision we have in place right now is one that has lots of 3,200 square feet or 3,300 square feet or in about that, because land is the premium, the affordability side, which is also something that we think about. Single family lots in Tofino or regular single family lot are currently going for $650,000 right now. At the cost of building one of those is, you all know what that is as well. So anyways, it's just to say that I take your point, and we didn't try to do this in the sense of preferring one or the other. I think there's a way we can adjust our policy to make sure that we address some of these concerns in terms of scoring probably primarily. And any suggestions that you have as well.
Yeah, great. And I understand the latency and I love that you guys went around and figured it all out with Mr. Cuba. I think for me, really, the crux is really those small units that, you know, like that is the missing middle. That is what we actually critically need to keep our, you know, in my mind, to keep our community going. Because there's got to be continuation. And so that's what I'm missing. There's one more, you know, we kind of bridges on, if you don't mind, me carrying on, and that is, that is the methodology and data used for per capita water use for unit use. Now, I actually kind of geeked out and I read through the water master plan, the water conservation plan, Fraser Works, you know, previous 2022 plan. And then I did some crunching notes and I found some anomalies. And and I just want to go some significant anomalies. So the water master plan says that the average per capita water use in Tofino is 0.212 meters cubed per resident or residential use. The proposed, you know, in your schedule there, you for this one to sort of work through the high density and all the developments, you guys use, and I'll pull it up here. It's pretty easy actually. It's 0.1 per person, pretty much. You can find that over 85 beds in a you got it up. You can bring it up if you got the thing up there. It says 85 beds for a staffacom equals 8.5 cubic meters, which is 0.1 cubic meter per person. Bring it up there.
In the report.
Yeah, it's in the report, yeah.
In RTC?
In the body of the RTC.
Okay.
Now, that's very low. That's a very low water use and less than the averages suggested by the water master plan. It's also significantly lower than the BC average, which is about 0.268, which the water master plan already acknowledges that Tofino is doing much better than almost every other community in water conservation at 2.12. So one of the things I noticed is that the water master plan, the conservation plan from McElhaney goes on to talk about growth. And I actually have it right here. It says additional population. And in case scenario one, and this is from the master plan, is 189 in scenario A. Doesn't matter which scenario. The additional population water demand, according to McElhaney, is 107 cubic meters for that additional 189, which is, it works out to 0.568 cubic meters per capita, which is significantly different again. And it goes on to actually go and say that the total MDD increase is in the 300s, which works out to 1 cubic meter per capita increase, and that's standard, goes all the way through. So my point is, and I did my own math to see what exactly are people using in Tofino per capita as opposed to per unit. These are all actually, I think almost all of them are 0.1 cubic meter or 100 liters per day per person. There is that on the low side in this draft of 0.1. And on the high side, in the water master plan and water conservation plan of 1,000 liters, 1 cubic meter or more. That is a significant difference. And so my point of all that is that in these fairly crucial documents and reports, we have a high and a low, and between the two, there is about 900 liters per capita difference. And so what I suggest is that the reality is probably somewhere closer to 0.2, which starts to affect how we look at water allocation. And so that's something that I think coming back, I would like to see come back, say, hey, like, what is that actual number? And how did we get it? Is it averages? Because, you know, some of those little units do not have 2.4 people in them, they have one. You know, that it's swung to the high, like, you know, the multiple people living in a 4 or 5 bedroom house. That's part of my point. Is I noticed that last night, and to me, I think it's important because we're trying to do something that's fairly comprehensive and it's going to last a long time. Be nice to have those numbers nailed down for real.
So through the chair, I'm gonna just answer to those questions. First, on the first piece, our averages come from actual meter data. So we pulled up, this last time, we pulled up 30% of each type of dog. We didn't pull up all of them, but we pulled up 30%. We could pull up all of them and provide those averages to council. Those are Q3 averages up in 2023 or 2024 or whatever data we have. You can even go back a number of years. Again, it's Excel sheets in a little bit of time and give you a really detailed something out. So the lower numbers are based on real data. Second part to this, your statement was that the water master plan made assumptions about MDD and about growth. But if you remember back 2 meetings ago, we talked about this being an inflection point. So creating a limits to growth automatically throws out those growth scenarios because we're making a different decision. So McElhaney's growth scenarios were based on OCP, high, medium, and low growth scenarios. We said, well, we don't even have that, we're gonna do this. And so we can't bring that back into, what we have to look at now is what we're planning to do, which is 120 cubic meters water, period. That's what we're talking about. That's the decision we made. And so I think if it pleases council, Mr. Louder and I can detail out what a unit in, what an apartment unit uses for water, what a townhouse uses for water, what a single family home uses for water, what a single family home with suite or caretaker cottage uses for water. We can do for everything because we have all that data. It's great. We have a great system and provide that to council to help this conversation. I don't know that we have the resources to go down and figure out how many people are in each of those things. We're gonna look at every single house. You know, the only people I think that generally do that is the government of Canada every 4 years during census. And so what I can do is try to figure out, looking at averages, rather than cherry picking places that, you know, like your place or my place or someone else's place, because that doesn't solve this, it doesn't help us with this conversation. And so I think if we put our heads together, we can probably come back with a little bit, well, not a little bit, we can come back with very accurate information about what each typology uses, and we can use our own internal knowledge or knowledge of the community to determine whether that feels right to us or not. I can tell you it will be right, it will be the averages. Some places will have 2 people living in it, other people will have 12, some people will have 4 people living in it, others will have 3. In the end, we're not gonna be, I don't think, knocking on doors to figure that out.
Yeah. I mean, perfect. That's just what I want to look back at, just because that the whole reason for that, you know, thing is to say, hey, like, you know, the multiple units use less water. Do they house less people? You know, that's what I'm sort of going for. And my assumption is it's not quite right the way that I've read the data, but I understand that if you can get, you know, that's my point. That's all I have to say. Okay. Councillor Steer.
I was just going to follow up on that because I was just, as you guys were talking in Schedule B, your methodology for estimating water allocation units, you've indicated, and that's based on real data that's coming from water meters, and you're applying it to a single family dwelling at 0.5 meters cubic per unit. What you're saying is, unless the Census Canada is going to happen to come by, you don't know how many people are in each of those particular typologies, but you have the data to indicate what's being used in each one of those. And that's what you're basing the 120 allocations that you indicated. Is that, so that I understand?
That's correct. And again, because we know that when we approve developments of whatever that is, sometimes 2 people move in, sometimes 5 people move in, but all we can do is, you know, with a level that we are at is to provide that average. What Mr. Louder and I will do is we go back and look at Schedule B again, and Schedule B is provided for mostly for transparency for future developers to understand what's going on and a little bit for us to help calculate those numbers. But those numbers were based, the ones in that current table were based off of limited data. I don't think we did that up to 30%.
You have Q3 2023 and it doesn't indicate what the percentage.
Yeah, but we can get right down to those details and pull up like the most accurate that we have. And so I have that in our notes to review for the next one anyways, but we'll look at that.
It's just, I was just gonna say, it's just a matter of taking a larger sample size.
Right.
Yeah, and then. Go ahead.
I was actually just gonna follow up on using Q3 of 2023. Do we feel that would be unrealistically low as we were in stage 3 water restrictions for July and August? Like we were in stage 3 by July 10th last year, so we spent a significant part of Q3 massively restricting our water use.
Thanks for the question, it's a great point. We won't have, we probably will have 2024 data soon. Some years to be done, so we can update that with 2024 data, provide a comparison. You know, the thing to remember too is that those are not necessarily gonna be anomaly years being in water restrictions. It was an anomaly this year not being in water, you know, the restrictions last couple of years, and so it might not be terrible data to use. But what we tend to do is look back. Like I think our water pattern looks like 12 years of data we have or something for use, so we can go look back and trend out that data. We try not to go that too far because we also know the population was a little bit different there. And so it may be something that we're looking at the last 3 years, like 22 to 24, to help do this data. So we can go per unit, per typology, average over 3 years, and to give us, you know, relatively good number that maybe we can all be comfortable with. Again, this is policy. This stuff is the devil's in the details. We have good information generally, but any decision we make on this policy has to be perfect.
For sure. I just think it would be important to just keep in mind people's desired use of the water, especially when we consider the resorts with their bathtubs and jacuzzis and hot tubs and all of these things as they come into play. We could look at a year like this where it was used to the desired amount as opposed to a summer where everybody was highly restricted.
Okay, any other comments from, go ahead, there's one.
Yeah, I thought I'd do a little follow-up that I really agree with Mayor Law that I think that maybe if we're looking at making. I like the matrix. I think it's very useful for developers. But I think if we are looking at maybe creating different levels of point scores, maybe more points can be allocated to the unit variety, because I do think family housing is something that our community really desires. And then I also thought maybe the water conservation could have a little bit more points added, as Councillor Sawyer pointed out, because I think that's what we want is like developments that could use less water so that we have more for other development.
Other comments from council, questions? Thanks for bearing with me. It's my time. Okay. What are we here? Back on track here.
There's a recommendation. Would you like to read it?
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Thomas.
I'll move that the limits to growth policy be received for discussion.
Second by Councillor Steer. Any further comments? All in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, let's see. We're going to bylaws. We have item 11.1 District of Tofino 2025-2028 tax exemption bylaw number 348/2024, and this is for adoption. Somebody like to read that unless there are any comments?
I'll move that the District of Tofino 2025 through 2028 tax exemption bylaw number 1348/2024 be adopted.
Second by Councillor Thomas. Any comments? All in favor? None opposed, motion carried. Unfinished business, seeing none. Going on to business initiated by councillor members. Councillor Coleman.
So I attended the Tourism Tofino board meeting, and after a bit of a break over the summer, we met on September 24th, we briefly discussed a letter from the West Coast Sustainable Tourism Association, and they wanted to send a delegate to the future tourism committee board meeting to discuss how the 1% would be collected to enrich the lives of the West Coast residents. We also reviewed the June, July, and August balance income and occupancy performance metrics. Occupancy numbers were down, but the revenue is actually up. We had a summer roundtable with the board members. We discussed how the increased cost of summer occupancy is not lowering revenue, but maybe pushing people to come up in the shoulder seasons. Some members suggested that the increased costs are leaving less change in the visitors' pocket than elsewhere, which may contribute to the declined spending in other businesses. We also reviewed the strategic plan tracker and discussed the upcoming board retreat at the Black Rock Resort in Q&amp on October 27th and 29th, which I will be attending. Today I attended the Tourism Tofino Scholarship Committee meeting, and we discussed the addition of another $10,000 to be allocated to a recipient outside of Q&amp Secondary School. So maybe a homeschool student or a graduate from the House Secondary School. So that'll be for a total of $30,000.
Wow. It's amazing. Thank you. Any other business? Councillor Steer.
Yeah, thank you. On September 25th, the Wickinninish Community School meeting, and just a quick update, there are discussions around the MOU with the District of Tofino. That went super well. Of course, something new like that, they're just sorting stuff out. So that was discussed, and they gave an update to the board from staff on that. Once again, a whole number of programs that are going on. Excellent work there. The main thing I wanted to bring up, the AGM is on October 30th between 5 and 6. So for all of those out in the world that would be interested, that would be great to attend. And we will be looking at 3 replacements for the board. There's a number of people that will be leaving the board, and so we're actively recruiting for board members. So once again, out there, if there is anybody that would be interested in joining the board of the Wickinninish Community School Society, we are looking for folks. So come on out, and that's it.
Awesome. Any other business initiated by council members? Anybody? No? Okay, moving on. Excellent. We're gonna go, oh yes, Ms. Posha, make an open call, question period.
Thank you, Mayor Law. I will now make an open call for questions to members of the public present in the gallery and those participating online. For those in the gallery who wish to speak, please raise your hand. If there is anyone attending online via Zoom that would like to ask a question, you can do so now using the Q&A function. Before asking a question, you will need to state your name, your address, and the agenda item you're speaking to. I will now do a call calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times. There are no questions at this time, Yella.
Okay, thank you. And, where's my? Close. What happened here? Moving on to the closed session. Would somebody like to move us into the closed session with recommendation? Or should I do it from the chair? Okay, I'll do it from the chair. Moving from the chair, the meeting be closed in the public pursuant to sections 91 ACGK and L community charter to discuss matters related to personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality or another position appointed by the municipality, labor relations or other employee relations, litigation or potential litigation affecting the municipality, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at their preliminary stage. That, in my view, in the view of the council, could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public. Discussions with the municipal officers and employees respecting municipal objectives, measures, and progress purposes of preparing an annual report under section 98 annual municipal report. Second by Councillor Steer. All in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Go to the close. So let's take a 5-minute recess. Thank you. Yeah. Breaks.